Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Game to the Comp video, we're going to be discussing Intel and AMD. From the AMD side of things, it's going to be Ryzen, specifically their processor lineup, because there are leaks that have appeared on the internet, as they tend to do, which detail 17 different chips. That's right, 17. That's an awful lot of SKUs. So we're going to go into whether I believe it's genuine and of course the entire lineup as we're going through this video. And then we're going to finish things off with Camp Intel and their Lake Crest chip, which is an absolute monster. How much of a monster? Well, 32GB of high bandwidth memory 2 for a start, and 8 terabits per second of memory speed access. It's, just so we're all clear, it's not a GPU, it's a Xeon co-processor, but very different from Xeon Phi. But we'll go into that in just a second. So, Ryzen and the lineup. So, we of course know the very basics of Ryzen in terms of the very high end is going to be an 8-core 16-thread, but the very high end chip has been rumoured to be almost a black edition. It's going to have higher clock speeds, and this has been rumoured for some time, and these leaks, if they're accurate, adds a lot of weight to this. So these leaks originated from a website, a Chinese website called Kula.com. Now interestingly, the leak has, or the thread, or whatever you want to call it, has since been deleted. Although you can still access the website, once again the leak comes up with, if you translate it in Google, what is known as an extreme error. But with all of that said, we can still talk about the different chips themselves. So we're going to go through a couple of the important ones. I won't go through all of them because, as I said, there's like, over a dozen variants, so I'll be here for way too long. But ones of note include the R7 1800X. This has 8 cores, 16 threads, 4 GHz boost clocks. So this would be the so-called Black Edition. Now, naturally, if you look at the entire amount of cache available, it's 20 megabytes. That's not new. We've known this for some time. And supposedly the pricing is going to be about $500 to $700 US for this level of processor. As we move down the lineup for the R7, they're also 8-core and 16 threads, and they are called R7 Pro 1800, R7 1700X, R7 1700, and R7 Pro 1700. I think you can get the problem with this leak already, but we'll go into that in a sec. But anyway, the clock speeds are from 3 GHz to 3.6 GHz. Now we've got the R5s. Now the R5s are what looks to be the same kind of price point / targeting the i5 7600K. That is, of course, Kaby Lake from Intel. And the clock speeds are going to be, for the 1600X, up to 3.5 GHz base and 3.9 GHz boost. Naturally, we go down the lineup, so you've got the Pro 1600, R5 1500, R5 Pro 1500, you get the point. Jesus, there are a lot of these chips. And finally, now it's worth noting, of course, that some of these go down. For example, the R5 1400X becomes a 4-core 8-thread. So the R5 Pro 1500 is a 6-core 12-thread, whereas R5 1400X is a 4-core 8-thread. So essentially, if you have a 1500 or above, it's a 6-thread 12, so a 6-core 12-thread. Jesus, it's even hard to talk about. Whereas on the other hand, if you have a 1400 or below, it becomes a quad-core processor with obviously 8 threads total. Then you get to the really weird part, which is the R3s. So the R3s, all of these are 4 cores with only 4 threads. So in other words, there's no simultaneous multi-threading. And the clock speeds also take a dive. I'm going to make the assumption, although obviously I don't have an AMD bod to ask, and even if I did, they're not going to tell me yes, this is the case. I could write to a couple of people I know at AMD, and they're just going to be like, we're not going to comment on this. So yeah, they're still 4-core, 4-thread, but the clock speeds are much lower. They're looking at like a 3.1 to 3.4 gigahertz, depending on base or turbo. So I actually did see this rumour last night, which kind of brings me into the second part of this whole thing, an analysis. A chap by the name of John, I won't give his last name, actually messaged me the Chinese link late last night after I put out the other Ryzen thread, but I was like, you know what, there's way too much information here. I need to kind of have a little bit of time, not be so tired, and actually think about this logically. Now, obviously at the end of the day, I don't know whether this is genuine. What we do know is that the chips are most likely going to be launching March 2nd. That's what pretty much all of the leaks, all of the official information points to. So March the 2nd, or at the very least, let's say, you know, the first week of March, we should see reviews and everything else start going live. The question is the leak in terms of the SKUs available genuine? That I'm not so sure about. Now, tomorrow we might get a whole bunch of people who say this is actually genuine. You know, we might even get someone who works at AMD say, yeah, you know, this is genuine. I don't think that's going to happen. You know, someone at AMD are not going to confirm this at this point, but I'm just saying it could. The problem I have with this is it's really messy. Really messy from the point of view of the customer. Now, admittedly, AMD are targeting the enthusiast first. So if you ask an enthusiast, hey, you know, what's the best processor, they're probably going to be able to help you with that. But it starts getting more complicated if you are either going for the OEMs like the HPs, the Dells, those type of folks, or just generally. Now, graphics cards have kind of a difficult problem as well in terms of their naming conventions. For example, let's say you don't know too much about graphics cards. There's been a freaking ridiculous amount of terminologies with GPUs. For example, you've especially back in the GeForce 2 days, but you know, besides those, you've got the GeForce 2s. Sorry, you've got the GeForce. You've got the GeForce Ti. In some cases, you've got the MXs. You've got the Pro, and it's not always that clear of what's what. Just for example, it's obvious that the the RX 480 is more powerful than the RX 470. Just for example, that's pretty clear. And that's one issue I have with this. It's like AMD have tried to simplify the naming conventions. It was one of the things they were going into with Polaris. The idea was that they were dropping the R9, you know, the R9 290X. It was instead just going to be RX 480 or RX 460 or whatever the hell. And now, obviously, they might need to do some amendments to that in the future, but I think it's pretty clear to the customer. An RX 470, an RX 480, it's pretty clear that one has a higher number than the other, and therefore it's more easier for a customer to discern, okay, that's the more powerful graphics card. I don't feel this is the appropriate venue for a discussion of mistakes of the past, but let's be honest, a lot of GPUs, this is particularly true in the early 2000s, late 90s. There were so many different graphics cards. It was really easy for someone who wasn't that, you know, technically inept. So, you know, they had an okay passing knowledge of computers to actually order the wrong thing. Example, I know someone who actually went in, was going to buy a GeForce, I think it was a GeForce DDR. I think it was. And they basically knew what they were going to buy, and then they just made a screw up and they bought an SDR because the way the websites were put together back then was shocking. So they had to basically RMA it and get the other one. It was a mess. And imagine that was someone who's fairly technically inclined. Imagine if you're not technically inclined, you had the bloody GeForce SDR, and then you had the DDR. SDR, of course, was slower because it had slower RAM, single data versus double data RAM. Whereas on the other hand, if you had the GeForce 2s, and this is not a complete list because once again I'll be here till Christmas, you had the MXs, you had the GeForce 2, the GTSs, and God knows what else, and there's the Pro, and it just became like, if you didn't know anything, it was really the price that helped. But then prices became even weirder because then you had like cards which would have double the amount of RAM on them. Even Nvidia with the 5700 Pro, they released like a 256 megabyte card, and it was just weird, just the way everything happened back then. Now, the reason obviously I'm bringing this up is just because a customer clarity is really important. Even Intel, I would say that their CPUs can be a bit weird, especially if you're looking between desktop and low power devices, there are obviously ways to tell, but if you're just quickly trying to do a comparison, it becomes really strange. Because, for example, you might have an i7, whereas most people associate an i7 for desktop with 4 cores and, multiple threads, SMT, or hyperthreading, I suppose is the correct term. But then you go to a lower power device, and it could be that it's only got 2 cores, but they're just running at much higher clock speeds. So when we start talking about these chips, that's the main issue I have with this. It's just like Ryzen R7 1800X, R7, and then you've got Ryzen right below that, Ryzen R7 Pro 1800. So to the average customer, like, what sounds better? What sounds better to you, the R7 1800X or the R7 Pro 1800? It's just a bit weird, in my personal opinion. And obviously that doesn't mean it's not genuine, but I just thought by now, if it was genuine, we would see more of this, people popping up. And at least as the time I'm recording this, there's not been anyone that's really verifying these leaks. But obviously at the end of the day, it doesn't mean much. I do remember the original source had said that their people they had spoken to were legitimate and they were, trustworthy and all that stuff. But obviously at the end of the day, that doesn't mean much. So take this one with a pinch of salt. But Intel's Lake Crest chip, you don't have to take with a pinch of salt because, well, this has been confirmed by Intel, so that's kind of nice. It's nice to not have, stuff that's kind of up in the air, isn't it? That's really confusing. So, the Lake Crest, chips are going to be aiming at deep neural networks. So, just for your FYI, it probably doesn't mean that you're going to be plugging this in to your PCIe slot anytime soon. Obviously, maybe Intel will spot that GPU sales are doing pretty well and maybe make a decision in the future, but for now, this technology is not going to be used at all. Now, obviously, Nvidia and AMD have been very active when it comes to AI and all that stuff. A lot of Nvidia's conferences, much to the frustration of gamers, may I add, is always dedicated to artificial intelligence, whether that's been from servers and deep neural networks down to self-driving AI. You know as well as I do that that's pretty much a foundation of their business at this point. So, a individual by the name of Rao, who is Intel's Vice President of Data Center Group and General Manager for AI Solutions, which is a pretty hefty title. We have developed the Nirvana hardware especially for regards to deep learning workloads. In this area, 2 operations are often mixed: matrix multiplication and convolution, end quote. So, just so we're clear, Lake Crest is the chip, whereas the technology behind the chip, the deep learning, is known as Nirvana. Now, Nirvana were actually bought out by Intel back late last year. Actually, no, it wasn't quite late. I believe it was like August-ish time. But anyway, they were bought out for over $350 million US. And so this technology has formed the basis of Lake Crest. And Intel will then do a follow-up after that known as Knight's Crest. Now, as I said, this is not designed for video games. This is designed specifically for AI workloads. And Intel is using a new architecture. The architecture in this case is known as FlexPoint, and this will be used inside arithmetic nodes inside of the Lake Crest chip. So what we have here is, according to Intel's own slides, unprecedented levels of parallelism, which offers up to 10 times the performance of current state-of-the-art, low power tensor operations, high bandwidth memory 2, up to 12 times faster than DDR4, and proprietary inter-chip links. Now, these offer 20 times the bandwidth for PCIe. Now, of course, this is really important because that means if you're farming data across chips, you don't have the latency inherent. So, from what we're looking at, the coprocessor, which is, of course, Lake Crest, will feature 32 gigabytes of high bandwidth memory 2. So, naturally, that means you've got 4 8GB stacks on the interposer. And this means you've got 1 terabyte per second of memory bandwidth with a clock speed of 2 gigahertz. So at a deeper level, each chip contains 12 processing clusters, which will feature several cores each. Now I say several because unfortunately the exact number has not been given, it has not been given, period. So each high bandwidth memory 2 controller has Each HBM2 memory, excuse me, has its own HBM controller. So, in theory, this chip is going to absolutely scream in terms of performance. What does this mean? Well, it's going to be a very, very competitive market when it comes to AI. At the moment, AI, despite the fact that we've made a lot of leaps and strides, is still pretty young. There's a lot of stuff left to do. There's a lot of inefficiencies and, frankly, just a lot of performance extra we need to squeeze out of things before we really start moving in the AI age. But it is starting to just get absolutely ridiculous at this point. So what are my thoughts on the whole situation? Well, Nvidia obviously are spending millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars per year on their own technologies. The problem is, at the end of the day, they are still having to compete against perhaps one of the old guard, Intel, and this company that they've acquired, Nirvana Technology, basically has really propelled them into greatness. So it really comes down to like what they're going to be using it for, and obviously how developers really utilize it. And once again, because this is for a specific purpose, deep learning, and that's really what it's aiming for. It's not like you're going to be playing, the new Doom on this or anything like that. So there is that to bear in mind. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.